Welcome to an IEXIST podcast. Our entire mission can be summed up in one phrase: becoming all that we are. It is our belief that fulfillment doesn't come from changing into things you aren't, but rather from becoming everything that you already are. And ultimately, we're here to press and empower you to lead lives that are full of fulfillment. We've dedicated this specific podcast to the dream. Not to having the dream or even talking about the dream, but to living the dream. The reality is that there's a stark difference between having a dream and manifesting one. Here you'll gain insight and wisdom keys directly from some of the water walkers of our generation, dream practitioners, those who have decided to tread paths where there were none, to step out into only what they could see. Come take a peek into the minds of some who, from within, create our world's most magnificent realities. I'm the creator and host, Bryan Pharr, and this is the Living the Dream podcast. Hey, I wanted to do somewhat of a deep dive into a piece of the conversation that I was having on the last episode. First of all, if you stumbled across this podcast by happenstance, this is the Living the Dream podcast. And as always, I am your host, Bryan Pharr. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I hope that you are navigating these swiftly changing times healthily. And I hope everything is going well for you. And if not, hopefully this becomes a piece of information that helps you to get through it a little better. And for everyone that's facing tragedy, my prayers are with you. Everyone that's working hard to ensure other safety and aid, I pray for you also. And send love, of course, and positive energy your way. All right. So I'm going to consider this somewhat of a bonus episode because it's somewhat attached to a bit of information that I was giving in the last podcast. But I wanted to cover something quickly, and also something that I feel like is going to be very vital and important in these coming days. Of course, we all know we're living through what has been labeled to be unprecedented times through this COVID-19 situation that's going on around the globe. Young and old are both saying, I've never lived through anything quite like this. Of course, we have gone through tragedies together as a nation, as a world, but as far as anything that has been like this, I don't know personally that there's been anything like it, which is why, again, so many people are labeling it unprecedented times. And so moving through unprecedented times, there can be a tendency to withdraw and really draw a negative picture around it. Change is not always comfortable, nor is it easy. I'm willing to say that it never really is, but there are some perspectives that we can draw upon and draw that will help us through them a lot easier. I believe that if you can draw the right perspective around something, then it can be easier to navigate through. Sometimes when we can see even a little bit of a why, or maybe somewhat of a how to get through certain times, then it'll make the transition a lot easier than if we were just in the blind. And so I just wanted to point out a little bit of information, again, coming out of the last conversation, that I think will prove to be helpful and vital through these swiftly changing times. All right, so a good piece of what I was covering a little bit, the last conversation I had in which I was interviewing my friend, and you have to go back and hear that. It's a lot of good things in that. Of course, this podcast is focused around living the dream, whatever that means for you specifically, whatever it is that you've drawn to be the dream for your life, for your household, for your family, for this world. But I wanted to quickly cover and deep dive into more of this idea of dependency. Now, of course, by now you've already seen the title of this talk, and I've entitled it Death to the Middleman. And again, this is just a very vital piece of information moving forward. This is actually something that's been on my heart for years now, and I think it's an appropriate time to recover this. I've actually covered it just a little bit in my book, A New Home, which you probably heard the ad for if you heard podcast number 1. And so we'll do 1.5 here by covering a little bit of the information from that book, or that's been in my heart, honestly, for a long time, and a little bit that was covered in the last podcast. First of all, let me preface everything I'm about to say by saying that we all have areas of dependency in our life, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. I don't want you to hear just a negative connotation anytime I mention the word dependency or anything like that. Secondly, I also don't want you to assume that when I use the word codependency, that I'm just alluding to some dramatic drug problem. All right. Although I know that many people suffer with addictions of all types, whether it be to drugs or pornography or certain things that normally people are really quick to judge and to turn their nose up at, or again, just have a judgmental viewpoint of. But I don't want you to be triggered in your mind to assume that that's what I'm talking about when I use the word codependence. It's much bigger of a subject matter than just being addicted to drugs and being addicted to sexual promiscuity or whatever you would label it, of any type. All right. Again, the idea is much wider. It's much bigger than that. And I think you'll be surprised to know that many more of us fall under the label of codependence than you would think immediately. So just open your ears up and your eyes as we're talking today. All right. So an easy way to approach the idea of codependence is to define it this way. And this is my own personal definition that's catered to the way I have to talk about the subject matter today. That definition is this: anytime you've turned what should have been an option into an obligation, you have entered into the realm of codependence. All right, I'll say that again. Anytime you've turned what should have been an option into an obligation, you've entered into the realm of codependence. And for my own sake, what I like to call codependence in anyone's life is middleman syndrome. All right. So anytime I refer to this idea of middleman syndrome, what I'm really talking about is codependence. All right. So one more time, it's when I turn whatever should have been just an option into an obligation. Then I now have middleman syndrome. And of course, middleman syndrome is referring to the idea of codependence. All right. So think about it this way. As I stated a second ago, it's absolutely, there's nothing wrong with having areas of dependence in our life. Actually, we all need help. We all should be able to lean upon one another in a healthy way. We should all be able to trust and rely on people to help without any abuse being involved in that help. All right. There should be a healthy balance in our lives of dependency, which if you heard the last conversation, what we're talking about in a healthy manner, we're talking about interdependence, where we're both coming to the table, ultimately being personally responsible enough and healthy within ourselves enough for ourselves to be what we rely on the most, to be whole enough to be a good help to someone else and to ourselves. And so again, we're calling that interdependence. But the only time it gets toxic is when we don't rely on ourselves enough. And that can come through a number of avenues. It could be areas that we've been wrongly taught. So it could be passed down through teachings of family members or bad religious principle, training of any type, whether it was in formal education or anything. It could have been a situation that you walked into early on and it was a situation that you were manipulated into. All right. And that just has to do with someone abusing the idea of help in your life. And that could be any particular person that you've ever run across. All right. And so it can come through a lot of different avenues. But what happens when we cross over into codependence is, again, we start to turn what should have just been an option for help into an obligation. And so what that looks like practically is you've now set something in the middle of you and whatever end you're trying to get to, and you don't feel like there's another way to that end. So let's just say that's education for a second. If I place any institution or any person in between me and that end goal of education, I have now introduced a middleman to my end goal, right? And when it's okay to get help and have that option there, anytime I've turned that option into an obligatory effort to where I have to get this person or this institution to teach me, to educate me, then now I've entered into codependence. All right. Because you don't necessarily need that person, that institution to teach you in order for you to be educated. All right. There's thousands of resources everywhere around you, in your phone, in your pocket, that you can lean on yourself to self-educate, or even through the mode of trial and error, through personal experience, you can be educated. All right. And there's even levels beyond that, which I believe has to do with the human spirit. All right. You can rely on other ways to be educated, but when you've put a particular thing in between you and that education, which is the end goal, now you have created a middleman situation and now have what I consider middleman syndrome. All right. And that's just one small area. So as you can see already, we're talking about codependence, and it has nothing to do with what you normally would think is codependence, or maybe has been labeled to be an extreme of it. All right. You can have middleman syndrome concerning anything, literally the things that are on the outside of you. When you place that thing, that person, in between you and whatever end you're trying to get to, and it's not just an option, it's now become an obligation. You have now entered yourself into the realm of middleman syndrome. All right. So practically speaking, that could be anything. That could be money. That could be, again, a friend, a spouse, an institution of any type, a job, a boss. Again, it can be, and literally almost everything. If you put something in between you and your happiness, you have now entered into middleman syndrome. All right. Or codependence. So I cannot be happy until, and normally there's some type of money in between that. There's some type of relationship in between that. There's some type of middleman that you've now inserted in between you and your happiness. My friend, that's codependence. All right. Now, there are many options that can be laid out across the table that will actually help cater to, or can help you along in the process of gaining happiness. All right. There's certain things you can do. There's certain things that you can lean on from others, whether it's a laugh, whether it's company, and that's okay. But if you don't have it there, this is not an excuse not to be happy. All right. And I'm not saying we don't need others and other things in order to contribute to our lives. I'm saying ultimately that when we rely on those things so much so, again, which are options for the happiness, for the education, for the success, then we allow ourselves to get into a mode of codependence, which again, we're appropriately calling middleman syndrome today.
Writer, producer, artist, coach, and inspirational motivational speaker, Bryan Pharr takes us on a deep, retrospective, and introspective journey ranging from his childhood until life today that invokes the question, will I live a life of significance or one of safety? Filled with experience-gained wisdom and revelatory insights, A New Home dares its readers to ask themselves the hard questions concerning their need to fit in. How far will you go? And will all the efforts you've made be worth it in the end? This perspective-shifting discourse is a must-read, and through its hard-hitting yet relatable, tear-jerking, and even at points comical nature may prove to be more of a life-changing event than just a good Sunday morning read. Get your physical copy or digital copy today at Amazon.com.
So again, this is just going to be a little bit of a deep dive to give you information and insight that I really think is going to help you through these times that we're dealing with concerning COVID-19 and just the dramatic change that we're having to go through. I promise to be quick. So maybe what I'll do in the future is offer some type of masterclass in which you'll be able to do things like get practical advice on how to actually pinpoint every single area of dependence in your life. And there's just simple questions that you can ask yourself that will be able to help you to pinpoint, again, those exact areas of dependence in your life. And so you can figure out where you are on the spectrum and where those areas of dependence are. Even if they're healthy, that's okay. But those specific areas. But I did, again, I promise to be quick. So just let me say two more things and kind of get out of your hair for the day. Let me complete what I was just saying a second ago by saying this really quickly. A lot of you have been fooled into thinking over the years that you needed certain institutions or certain people in order to have, whatever specific end goal you have. And so, again, we are finding out through these times that honestly, a lot of these things were not necessary, and that the way you were being pitched into relying on these institutions and people too much just came from people honestly being too good of salesmen at times. And what I mean by too good of salesmen, I don't mean that you can just excel so high that you're quote unquote too good. I'm saying that they have become manipulative over time, and to ensure that the products are being sold to you and that you're relying on them, they've extended themselves too far to not just being an option. And it's okay to be a salesman, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, when I've obligated you to my product through a series of manipulative moves so that you think that you're nothing without my product or without my organization or without my institution, then I've gone too far and actually thrown off the balance to an unhealthy one in which people are relying on me too much and I'm relying on you, even as owner, as boss, as creator, as salesman, too much. All right. So normally, even if I'm the manipulator in the process, I have an unhealthy balance within myself, all right, to where I need to be relied upon, and I'm actually relying on you too much as consumer, as participant, all right? And I hope this is not going over anyone's head. Again, I just want to move through this kind of quickly, but here's what will sum it up, honestly, the best way. You don't need, now, except for things that are required by law. I will never be a person that's going to tell you to go out here and literally be on the run from the law or be on the cusp of going to jail all the time because you're trying to get around laws and things like that. I'm not promoting any of that. But, where education is legal, then, abide as much as you can by every law and rule that will help you succeed in the end. All right. So we're not talking about legal obligations right now. But on the outside of that, hear me by saying this. You do not need a formal education to be educated. All right. You can educate yourself. That's just an option. Obviously, through these times, we're seeing even now the way school can be altered and even shut down in certain cases, that I don't care how much somebody pitched it to you as being so necessary in times past. We see that when an enemy has set itself up so strongly against certain systems that you cannot avoid closing certain things down, you see how much they're not needed in these times. So you do not need an educational system in order to be educated. You don't need a religious system in order to be spiritual. All right. Again, someone like me who has thought that for years would sound crazy years ago saying this, but with eyes wide open on the things that are happening around us all right now, it's obvious to see that you have survived in your spirituality. Some of you are probably having withdrawal symptoms, but you're not dying because certain institutions, organizations have had to close down. So please hear me and open your eyes and see that you did not and don't need it in order to have a spiritual life. I'll say it more plain than that. There's nothing truly standing in between you and God. All right. You don't need a priest or some preacher or anything like that in order to initiate a conversation between you and a maker or you and spirituality at all. I'm not saying that we don't need people in our lives that can help guide us and things like that. But again, we're talking about a healthy balance. All right. So we're talking about turning what was an option into an obligation, all right, to where now you have a codependent relationship on the organization, on the institution, in order to whatever end goal that you have. All right. You're not gonna go to hell because you couldn't go to church. You know what I'm saying? For a month or whatever, that's just being as blatant as I can be or whatever. Or if it was for the rest of your life, you understand what I'm saying? Some of the unhealthy reliance on, again, some of the educational systems, some of the religious systems, some of the things that we've dedicated ourselves to, even in corporate America, in government, a lot of the things that were offered to you as the only solution, and you were manipulated into believing that you needed it so much. All right, you're now having to rely on different muscles, the adaptation muscle that everybody's having to work through these times so that you really know what's necessary and what's being played to you as necessary, or what's been played to you as necessary in the past that was not. All right. Many of the things that you thought were necessary, you're able to see now. But all of this is about also restoring that balance. All right. So that we do not become codependent on things. And even if we did, not for too long, that we continue to change in healthy ways to evolve as human beings. All right. So death to the middleman is what I say. And I don't mean the conveniences of life. Some things that you don't do, such as particularly you may not have a full garden where you can feed yourself that's in your backyard, or those of you who live in apartments, so it's not even particularly an option to have a full garden right now at this second in your life outside of your apartment. All right. Not to say that you couldn't do it some type of way, but here's what I'm saying. There are certain things that, again, where we have reliances. I don't think there's anything wrong with the grocery store. And that is somewhat of a middleman. All right. It's getting you to the food without you having to do the guard. It's actually relieving a part of what probably could be a stress in your life if you're just a person who needs to dedicate yourself to other work and to your family and things like that. It's a convenience. It is a middleman, but I'm not talking about healthy balances. It's okay because you're feeding those who are providing the service to you with your money, with the exchange, and they're also helping you to fulfill your life's call by cutting some of the work out of you being able to feed yourself and your family. All right. So that's okay. That's a healthy reliance. That's an area of dependency, but that's one that's okay. All right. So when I say death to the middleman, I'm talking about every area of codependence in your life that is being filtered out right now, in which, again, you're having to learn to work certain muscles and to relax others and to move about life in a different way. And that's okay, because this is just a filtering, I believe, just a filtering process to move back so you can see what was necessary. It's kind of a way to kill off some of the wolves in your life. And again, that's okay. Wolves will be killed off in the coming days. That's what's going to happen, because times like these strip away what's unnecessary. It's a filtering time. All right. And so again, I say death to the middleman, and it's time for you to say death to the middleman in your lives, the way that you've sometimes been codependent upon a certain thing, having to do things a certain way, thinking that I can't be this without that. All right. I can't get to this end without that. You've been fooled into thinking it. You've been coached into thinking it. You've been taught into thinking it for a long time. You've been sold into thinking it for a long time, but now's the time to start to reevaluate your lives concerning those middlemen. Again, the bad ones that have entered into your life through areas of low self-esteem, whether it was torn down or was never a thing in your life. Your self-esteem has been damaged through outside sources from an early age. And again, have not even been able to target and realize how many areas of codependence are there. But again, when times like these come, again, we all have to understand we're all being forced through change. But at the end of the day, death to the middleman. All right. It's all going to be good. But what has to happen in all of our lives is that we begin to notice the areas we've been too reliant upon certain things, that when they're taken away, we don't die, that we actually adapt and that we actually move forward with a new strength and a new self-reliance, a new personal responsibility, a new hope that's actually going to build our self-confidence, that's going to build our self-esteem over time. Once you see that you didn't have to be relying on certain things the entire time, it's going to change your entire life. All right. So we're going to have to relax those areas of codependence and actually become more. I've actually seen a trend, and this will be the last thing I'm saying. I've actually seen a trend in which I'm starting to see people take advantage of a lot of these platforms that have been provided to us by the geniuses, the great men, the great women of our generations, who are slowly cutting away things that have not been necessary. Again, some of the cutting of the middleman has happened through many platforms that allow us, even the one that I'm using now, all right, to be able to get my voice to you. I didn't have to go through 10 people. I decided I had to decide, and that's all I had to do, and make the necessary preparations to do it on my own. I didn't have to go through anyone, any particular person. All right. But that is possible also with the help and the aid of those who have helped to cut out the middleman. All right. In which, if this was a radio show, maybe I would have had to go through certain avenues and people to try to get it done, which is, again, it's nothing wrong with that. If you've gained popularity, favor with people, and you have a radio show, again, not speaking against that. Again, I don't want to put a negative connotation around the idea of dependency in general. But again, I also don't want to put an excuse on those of us who do not have those areas of favor as of yet, or who may not ever have them. You still have an avenue. There's still a way to get your voice out here. As an artist, you don't have to be signed to a label. We put out music all the time. All right. And I produce everything in-house myself, and we have the ability to get it across the world. So there's the trend. We're talking about cutting the middleman, because there are a lot of people who would love for you to think out of your vulnerability to what you've been trained into or either manipulated into, that the only way to make it quote unquote big is to go through this Hollywood producer or to go through this record label and again, those are options. It's not codependence until you've made it an obligation. And so now we're talking about the dream, right? Whatever the dream is, I want to be highly educated. I want to be a teacher. I want to be this. I want to be that. All right. There's great options out here. All right. But at the end of the day, you are your ultimate helper in achieving whatever goal that is. And anytime you think you're going to be nothing without the help of, again, this person, this artist, this institution, this organization, this avenue, whatever it is, without that, you're not going to be whatever's on the other side of that. You have now, again, entered into middleman syndrome. And this is not something that is going to cater to your success. It's actually hindering you. All right. So you want to kill those areas of dependence, cut the middleman. You got to kill the middleman men in your life. And honestly, life is, again, filtering and doing it for you during these times. But at the same time, I want you to be aware of it and start working new muscles so that we can move through this in a way that's going to be productive for everyone. Listen, got to cut the middleman out of your life. If you don't hear anything else, please remember those things. Realize which areas in your life that you've made options, obligations. Again, no matter how it happened, whether you were coached into it, manipulated into it, sold into it, taught into it, whatever the situation is, work on different areas that you can start being more self-reliant so that you can build your own confidence and start cutting middleman out of your life. Become more independent so that you can open up areas of interdependence in your life, healthy balance, healthy dependency in your life to where you can rely and trust in other people without the abuse involved and the manipulation. So let's all do our due diligence to cut the middleman. And again, it's going to happen regardless, or it's happening for a lot of us regardless. Life is making the change happen. But it's important to see what I'm saying so that you can navigate these times properly and understand a part of the reason why those things happen at times. It's just a filtering process. All right. Death to the middleman. I hope you got something out of that. As always, I pray that your way would be made prosperous. Until next time.